place out of Newburgh, up in the hills, and we're going to look at and retrieve a early 50s Lancia Aurelia that was crashed in a rally, and you can see what's there. The car is worth saving, really. I mean, one of these cars really, no matter what the condition they're in, are worth saving. So I know it went over on its top. I know it had a suspension failure. We'll see what we got. It might be a little bit of a challenge to get it out of the shop space that it's in and into a trailer, having suspension wiped out. But we'll see what we got when we get there. As I understand it, rear suspension broke away from the tub from the leading point and folded under, causing the car to just turn 90 degrees and damn near 90 and pitch off the road, and land on its nose and go over. This was a car that was actually drivable, a done, restored car. The owner had it fully restored about 10 years ago. The paint began to fail, so the owner brought it into us for paint work. We tore it completely apart, which is a necessity to really do one of these correctly. And we found item after item that had been done incorrectly. Parts were on backwards, critical parts were missing, the paint was failing in multiple areas. These Jags can be tricky to put back together if you are unfamiliar with them or careless. We get them running kind of as early in the process as we can, just in case there's an issue. If we're doing a fresh build, we always run the engines in on the run stand, so we minimize any chances of issues. But this one should be pretty safe. Everything was functioning before we took it apart. So this is all clean assembly. So we map everything out, we lay everything out. There's an order to it. Everything goes back together very systematically. And it's also a really dangerous time because the paint is susceptible to damage, so you have to be very careful about moving in and out of the car and putting things on it. But it's very typical of our routine of assembling cars. We'll get the suspension back on them just to get the car sitting down on its weight, and so everything is set where it's going to be, so as we're assembling there's no mysteries later that come up after we get the car weighted. So suspension goes on first, then the engine and the driveline to get the car sunk down where it's supposed to be. The owner decided to just get it done and done correctly this time, so we've been working on that. We are at the point that the paint is done and we are reassembling it. Clean build, but definitely takes a lot of patience and skill at this point. The owner, Ed, opened up his shop and the Lancia Aurelia is right here. It honestly caught my breath that Ed had survived this car wreck.
And we were blasting along a country road, although actually at legal speed, believe it or not. And I was about to miss a corner, so I hit the brakes hard, and suddenly the car just steered to the left. And it was so strange, and the rear end of it started to lift, which it didn't make any sense. I let off brakes immediately because it almost flipped on the road. I managed to crank the wheel over and at least stabilize it, but I couldn't turn it around. The captain's sending commands to the rudder, but the ship's not responding. We're just this crabwise sliding down the road, and eventually we ran out of road and went off the edge of it. Dropped about 8 feet, punched in, rolled through the woods. Luckily, a friend of ours was nearby. They saw all this happening, and so within a few minutes, people had arrived. But yeah, we had to pry. I remember we unbuckled our seat belts, dropping to the roof because we're upside down. We need to get out of here before this thing catches on fire. And the door was jammed a little, but I managed to push it open enough. He got out. Of course, the door closed and I couldn't get out. And I rolled the window down, which was up, because it's upside down. Managed to push my way out. I got a little cut up and minor head injury because the roof collapsed on that side.
This was the first vintage car that Ed acquired, apparently. It had actually been damaged previously, and he had brought it back to life and raced it for a few years. After this particular wreck, he held on to it, hoping he could fix it himself one day. That's when his good friend Atif begged him to sell the car and that he would have it restored.
The car actually, in my view, gave up its life, I would say, for both the driver and the navigator. So it's been sitting in Ed's shop almost as a museum piece for the last 8 years or so. And my hope is to restore the car with Joe and Vintage Underground's expertise.
Well, let's get these bits out of the way here. Let's hit the side of the trailer now, yeah. Bill has been restoring this straight 8 engine from a Packard. We are not doing any restoration work on the body of this car. It came to us from another shop. After their technicians tore it apart, they realized they didn't have the skills or wherewithal to deal with this engine. And so it came to us in several boxes.
And we sent it to Springer's. They did all the machine work and we assembled it, painted the block. We needed to run the engine, so we had our machine shop make this platform to run it. When we assembled it to get it to run, we had some minor leaking issues through some of the studs. There was some pitting on the back of the water pump plate that required a little bit of sealant. Nothing major, and we sealed those up and put it back together. It actually runs really smooth. It's a straight 8 and it's a very big, heavy engine. From what I understand, the straight 8 inherently runs very smooth. It's got good oil pressure. We pre-run the engine before we give it back to the customer to be sure that there's no coolant leaks, oil leaks, no overheating issues or any other issues we might run into. Probably wouldn't see any of the detail at most normal shops. They don't put a lot of detail into their actual appearance of the engine. We spent a lot of time on this, cleaning parts, painting parts. We use special Packard green paint. It's as close to the original color as we could get. So all the added detail I don't think you would find at your average shop.
Bill got this done, paying attention to all the smallest of details, like the original engine color and detailing. It has been stand tested, and the owner was beside himself. You may wonder why we brought our biggest trailer for such a small car. The answer is because you never know what you will find.
14, sir.
14 feet. Which one's going?
The blue one.
All right, 14, 13 feet to play with.
You got me all the way strong there?
Yeah.
12, 9.
Oh,
12, 11. No. We're in 13.
man, I think we're in. After we got the Aurelia out, we realized that we just might be able to squeeze in one more car that Ed had for sale. We carefully measured and realized we could bring home the Lancia Aurelia with just 3 inches to spare in the trailer. Getting the Aurelia out was difficult because none of the tires faced the same direction. We had to put each wheel on separate dollies to get it to even move in the same direction on the driveway.
Gentlemen, we are going to go to a stopping point here in a moment. As soon as we can reposition this caster, we're going to. Okay. Let's keep going. Are we coming off of the front? Yeah. We're a foot away from the front deck. Okay. So we're going to want to face it.
I'd driven that car 30,000 miles and I wondered, what could I have done wrong? I know how to drive this car intimately. Well, what we found later, the rear shackle that holds the right leaf spring tore loose under braking. Turned out the plug weld was ineffective from new. It had always survived on these 2 perimeter welds that were sort of temporary. And so once that popped loose, it has a Dadione rear axle. It suddenly had rear wheel steering. So that explains why the car suddenly went to the left. And then as it slid, the actual half shaft bent and the rear wheel went under it, and that's why the rear end rose up. So it all made sense once we understand the failure point.
With us, it's working good on this side.
was a real struggle to get this car on the trailer and definitely needed all hands on deck. To the layperson, the sleek lines of the E-Type seem to be a restoration that can just get done in the home garage. And many have also found that it is just not that simple. The bonnet cannot be sat down. It has to be either on a specially engineered stand or on the car. These things are awkward. I mean, this from here to here is completely unsupported except for 2 points, 2 hinge points right up front. So you've got this big thing that's reasonably delicate and painted on both sides, and it's just not a fun piece to have in the shop waiting to be installed because you cannot set it on any surface. You've got louvers which are incredibly difficult to get right. So these are hard. Not only that, when we build these cars, we fit them extensively because the mating of this to the tub kind of defines a lot about the car, and these gaps and everything are good. So it's all been done. It's all been fitted and everything's just putting it together now without doing any harm. It's safe and we can move forward on the assembly. Something like this is a big step in an assembly, kind of getting it done, and then you can start throwing more of the build at it. Getting the bonnet installed is a significant hurdle in this build. Once it is properly installed, fitted, and adjusted, the rest of the build is smooth sailing. This is a major milestone in an E-Type restoration. And so we have to support and angle and move to this thing until somebody underneath can get those in place. Once that's there, the entire thing has its stability. It's all from one point right here. So it's one of the things that makes these cars really cool in the design, but it also is one of the things that makes them a real pain in the ass in aligning them and making them do what you want and be the right shape. So it's all kind of tricky getting this thing to set in place initially. Everything's already been done and measured, so we know where everything goes, we know where the shims go, we know where everything's at, but you still have to take this 5 foot long big thing and get it in the shape where they'll go back in. So it's a little bit awkward. So not only are we dealing with setting this to the body and the back, but the engine's already in here, the radiator's in here, and all this fits. That's the reason this hump is here, is because there's stuff under here that can damage the bonnet if you bump it. We made it. I would say safely, but I don't think there's much more damage we could do to this car. I'm excited to get going on this car. This is a lot of work ahead of us, and I know my team can do it. Because this is unibody construction, we will have to strip it down to see what damage has actually occurred. This assessment will allow us to come up with a checklist to move forward. Atif is excited to hear about the updates, and so we'll allow him to follow along with the progress. We love having the customers follow along in the progression of their cars because they really do love them. Do you want to follow along? Of course you do. Subscribe and never miss a thing. Next time we will have the Aurelia on the lift. The chances of us finding any parts are slim, so we will be building this all in-house. It should be a challenge in the very best way.